Okay, so we're going to pick up on chapter 8 where we left off yesterday, which is somewhere in the middle. We did code the teams, the NFL teams app, kind of what the book calls version 1. And then we learned some additional skills in the second half of the chapter and apply those skills to what they call version 2 of our NFL teams app. And so I'll just be making modifications from here as we go through the PowerPoint. So, when we have this MVC pattern, models separate from the views and the controllers, MVC, I always heard of, it was like, okay, well, I knew what a view was, I knew what a model, and I knew what a controller, and then they're going to start throwing something like this at you, a view model, a VM, right? Well, that's neither, it's neither view, but it is more like a model. So you start hearing this pattern, MVC, and then just like individual pieces, like like view models, that are not a traditional single part. So what is a view model? Because I guess what I'm saying is I've heard of these things before, I just hadn't worked with them until recently. Well, if you think about a model, well, you have a single entity, a single thing, and then you send that to a view. But a lot of times you have to load up additional data for that view using ViewBag. And we've done that, right? So in addition to sending a model to a view, we loaded up some additional data into a ViewBag and sent that to the view as well. But as we discussed yesterday, you don't get IntelliSense with that. It certainly works, and there's really not a major problem if you get it to work, but you don't get IntelliSense, therefore your errors are runtime errors instead of compile time errors. And so that's kind of the strength of the view model, is you make a model that's essentially a join, because if you really look at what's going on here, we have a list of teams and a list of conferences and a list of divisions. And so this is a model that's not a single thing. This is essentially a join from multiple tables worth of data, right? And we're going to load it all up into one model, right? It's not a single thing now, it's multiple things for a view, right? So it's a model that's essentially joining things together, that you then send that model to the view, and then you don't need to use ViewBag, right? And again, the benefit is you get IntelliSense, you get compile time, error checking versus runtime. And so it's kind of the benefit, right? And so the first thing to do is add a model inside of our models folder and start to refactor this code a little bit. So this is going to go inside of our models folder, and let me kind of close everything and save all, close. Just boot it up from where I left it off yesterday, make sure somehow nothing broke. Okay. This is where we left off from the first video. And so let's start by making a model. Again, I like to think of it as kind of like whatever data you need for the view, just put it all in here. And so since this is a model, we're going to add the class. This class is on page 307 of our textbook. This is a Teams view model. The convention here is to call it view model. Not required. It's not one of those strong conventions, but it is a naming convention. So it is just a C# class with some properties. Prop Let me stop it from running. Let me add in my new keyword. So we have a list of teams, a list of conferences, and a list of divisions. Called divisions. They talk about keeping your view models mostly just for data. They're not adding a lot of methods to it, but they do mention that you can have some helper methods like that just affect it can be used in the view. So these methods, in other words, you know, don't add a lot of methods to these classes, but they do add just some that they can use. Public string. Remember that this arrow syntax just returns. If you have a single statement, it's just going to return. To lower, does the conferences passed in match the active conference to lower? If it does, it returns active. Otherwise, it does not return anything. So this is a helper method to determine active link. We wrote one of these yesterday, very similar. Okay, so this is our first view model. Does the theory make sense? Like, we're just loading up all the data out of the database that we need for a particular view, instead of kind of putting some of it in ViewBag. It's all going to be stored in the model now. Okay, so now that we have our model for our view, we're going to refactor our home controller to use that model. Now notice we were getting the active conference and the active division. We kind of stepped through this yesterday and we showed that we were getting those from our route. We still will get that through the route. It's kind of interesting how it works. But instead of doing this, we're going to put in a Teams view model called model. Again, we're getting rid of our view bag. And we can actually load up our model with conferences like this. So I'm refactoring our view bag to put the conferences inside of our view model. We're going to put the divisions inside of our model. But you might notice what I deleted. I'm just going to undo. There's a piece here where we got the active conference and active division, and we had that in view bag. And you might notice when we refactor this code, we got rid of that. So the active division and the active conference came from the URL, and it's no longer in this code. There's a note that I would put about that, and the note is MVC uses something called model binding to assign the values of route segments that are passed to the method properties of this object. And so basically, using this model binding, our model will be able to retrieve things out of our routes, like the active division and the active conference, using this model binding. And they say you'll learn more about model binding in chapter 10. So we're on chapter 8. We're going to learn more about model binding in chapter 10. But for right now, they just say, hey, this active div and active conference, it just kind of works because of this thing called model binding. So here's our iQueryable team called query. This line stays the same. And now we could say if model.activeConf is not all, then we apply, and again, this ActiveConf is now model.activeConf to lower. And notice we are getting the IntelliSense I was talking about, model.activeConf. Same thing here, model.activeDiv and model.activeDiv. Now we could say model.teams. Remember, we have a list of teams. Model.teams equals query to list, and return the model to the view. So that's refactoring of the home controller. So next up is to refactor the view. So we've added a model, we refactored the controller. Let's go into our view home index. And we're going to set our model to be a Teams view model. This active method we took out, right? So I can comment this out since we put that inside of our model. We don't need it here. And let's take a look at our first for each loop. Right, so here's a for each loop. Here's our all anchor tag. And our all anchor tag is going to keep the active conference to all. And now instead of getting out a view bag, we'll say at model, capital M, dot active div and here in our class we delete this method call and call it with this syntax now. Say at model dot check active conference for the word all. Close that, close that. So again, if I open this back up, well, if I open up my model, check active conference, takes in one string. Just want to make sure that the method call was right. Model checked active conference takes in a string, sees if it matches the active conference. If so, it's marked as an active link. Okay, so now for each conference, conf in, again, model.conferences. We still put the conference ID here. The active div is no longer viewBag active div, is now at model.activeDiv. And again, we're going to call this method differently at model.checkActiveDiv. Checked active conference. Conference.conference ID. So here we're seeing if the active conferences is all, but other than that, we check the active conference for that particular conference. So you have to pass in the identifier of the conference, so that makes sense. And that is our first refactored link there. Of course, we have to do the same thing with division, right? So they actually don't show that. So let's start with our all. At model.activeConf. Well, notice up here on the conference, we're checking the active div.
Okay.
And so here on the division, we're checking the active conference. Then our method call at model.checkActiveDiv, passing in the string of all. Now we loop through for each div in model.divisions. It is easy to get crossed on this. This is no longer view bag active conference is now model active conference. And this active div remains the same. And at model check active div, passing in a div dot vision ID. And now our last for each loop, for each team in model.teams. Spin it up, see what breaks. Oh, thank you, Firefox.
Got you covered.
Not now. Working. We are refactored and nothing is breaking. I'm lucky. You're probably not as lucky. We are now using a view model instead of a view bag.
That's considered best practice, right?
Yeah, I mean, given the choice between the two options, would you rather it crash at runtime or crash at compile time? I would say that's compile time. Easy answer.
Can you show like a example of it crashing at the compile time?
You know, I did that yesterday, and I didn't do a good job of it. Because I was like, look, you know, you can rename this, and, you know, it's going to try and read from view bag and watch it crash, and then it didn't crash. So I tried, and I failed. But suffice to say, you know, we all like IntelliSense. We all like code assistance.
For sure.
So there's the refactoring of our code that we just did. And now on to redirection. And so certainly I've been to a website before and the domain maybe has moved and you just get redirected to another URL, right? That's pretty commonly enough. You know, companies rebrand. You know, I think of old Lid Launch that is now Hat Launch, right? So if you go to lidlaunch.com, it's going to redirect you to hatlaunch.com. Probably. And so, you know, redirecting from one URL to another is pretty common. There's 4 different classes, which you would, you know, they call the subtypes, right? Because they're all action results, right? They all inherit from action result abstract class. The one that's used for external links outside of your site is the class of redirect result, and then within there, there's 2 methods that you can call, and there's basically a standard redirect and one that's kind of what they call moved permanently. The difference between a 301 and a 302 is this. Moved permanently, if you redirect, so let's just say, you know, you hit this route on, you want to redirect to google.com. Redirect permanent, some browsers will cache it so that instead of doing a GET request, getting the file, and then having to redirect, it's basically cached in the browser, and so it's one less step. So these, when your resources are in fact permanently moved, and you know you're always going to redirect from one thing to another, you know, these can be slightly more efficient. Is really what it boils down to, these move permanently methods over these other ones that don't basically get cached in the browser. So again, both of these methods, when you're looking at these both redirect to external URLs. This one is a URL within your app. Again, the difference between 301 and 302 remains the same. But if you just want to redirect to, whatever the local URL may be, if you want to redirect, again, all three, I guess you would say all six of these are all to local resources. Obviously, this is redirecting within your app to another action. And this one, redirect to route, as we've done, we've named our routes. So if I kind of go into here, we got to name our route and we named it custom. Let me bring that back in because yesterday we were toying around with this, right? We named a custom route, and that's essentially what you can use this last one by providing the route name. You could redirect it to one of those custom routes. We've used this one, I believe, already. Redirect to action. And if you're just looking at this one, so again, like the TLDRs, there's a bunch of different methods to redirect. Some of them to external, some of them are to internal. And if you want to redirect to internal, there's like 6 ways to do it. There's no one right answer. There's many ways of redirecting internally. And then 302 and 301, small difference there. So again, they highlight that external URL within your app, redirecting to an action within your app, and using a named route. So those are the highlighted there differences that I mentioned. Even if you're just looking at one of those methods, right? So just looking at this method, which again is going to say, hey, redirect you to a different action of the same controller or with a different controller. Any one of those methods are going to have a bunch of overloads. So here's 4 overloads for that one method. So you could provide it one argument, which is just the action of the current controller. This one is an action of a different controller. This one is an action and saying, hey, here's my action. And I'm also looking for a route that needs an ID. So here's a parameter for my route, right? So here's a piece of data that the route could use. And this one is an action and a controller. And again, that route parameter, that piece of data for you to put up in the URL for one of those little segments, right? So 4 overloads all within one method. And this is an example of using those, right? So if you say redirect to an action list, that's of the current controller. This is a list method of a different controller. This is a details method passing a route parameter. So that would use this one, right? The action followed by a route parameter. So this would be whatever the ID that would be passed into the index method. So basically, at the controller, because that's where all these are at, redirecting to another method inside of a controller somewhere. Lots of flexibility in calling those different methods. And this is essentially doing the same thing with the shorter hand syntax. So literally this line of code does the same thing with this line of code, just with a shorter syntax. And that sends just like an object. This would be sending a dictionary to supply parameters. Again, using this version of that method call right here. Okay, so a little bit about redirecting and the different ways to redirect from one controller action to another. Then the book goes on and talks about something that I found a little bit interesting, which is this concept of like, hey, we've all done this before, right? So you click the buy button and it's spinning. And then you're like, well, did I make the purchase? Do I click buy again? Do I wait? Do I click the buy button twice? What happens if I refresh it? Am I buying this computer twice? right? So we've all been there where you've used a form, you click the submit button, and it doesn't respond very quickly, and then you refresh, and then you don't know if like your credit card has been charged or not. And so instead of redirecting you to the same page, which is kind of the default, right? When you do a post, it kind of sends you back to the same page. You could redirect to a different page, right? And if that redirection happens, then you don't have to worry about submitting the form twice, right? So it's very common to post data to the server and redirect to a different get, like a different get of a different page, a different get call, right? So they call that the post redirect get pattern. Fun little term there. PRG, as they call it for short. Post. So you post, right? Then you redirect to another get, and that helps you from accidentally submitting the form data twice. Okay, so here's an example of a post, right? So whatever this is doing, this is adding something. It looks like it's adding a team, right? Notice the return data type. We're not returning to a view, right? Instead, we are returning to a redirect to action result object and calling that method to redirect to another controller, the home controller, the index method, right? So this is using that post redirect get pattern. Basically, you post some data to the server. You don't want it to post twice on accident. So instead of returning a view here, a view result object, we're returning a redirect to another controller, and in this case, another action. So I just found that really interesting because we've all been there before. We've all done that where we've bought something and we don't want to buy it twice. And so this is how you can prevent that or prevent your end users from accidentally posting something twice by doing this redirect get pattern. So found that really interesting. And in this case, this is the index method of the home controller. Obviously, this is a get method that they have highlighted here to show you how that works. Well, one more concept before we do kind of the version 2 of this NFL Teams app. And this last concept, again, I found this interesting because when we're working in programming, we're always working with data, and we are learning new ways of persisting data. And so this temp data, what have we used to persist data so far? We've used ViewBag, right? So if you want data to be sent from a controller to a view, we either put it in a model and sent it over via the model, or we put it in ViewBag. The way ViewBag works is it's going to go from a controller to a method and then expire, right? So the data only persists as long as it takes that controller to send it to the view, and then the data kind of it's out of scope, and when it's out of scope, it's not accessible. But again, ViewBag is from controller to a view. Temp data is different. Temp data will persist your data. Now this is also important. This is persisting the data on the server. So this is taking up server resources. If you look forward to next chapter, it starts talking about cookies. Cookies are JavaScript. JavaScript is client-side data persistence, right? So we're talking about this new tool that can persist data from one controller, send data from one controller to another controller. Well, what is this PRG doing? This post redirect get is sending sending the user from one controller to another controller. And so there's a couple things here. Number one, temp data is persisting data on the server. I think that's important to understand. Number two, it's used to send from one controller to another controller. Okay. Number three, temp data persists on the server until it's read, which is different. So it'll stay there until it's read on the server. And so it's taking up your server's RAM, it's taking up the resources on your server. Obviously, you put data into temp data, and this pulls data out of temp data. Notice this is that PRG pattern that we're talking about, where we've got this controller that redirects to another controller. And we're sending information from one controller method to another controller method. So this is an example of putting it in. This is an example of pulling it out. Once it's pulled out, then it's available for deletion. In other words, it can be taken, it can be removed from RAM, and those resources freed. So temp data is just different, right? It's just different than ViewBag. ViewBag is used to send data from the controller to a view. Temp data is used to go from one controller to another controller, and the data persists differently than ViewBag does. And so here you can kind of load up some data in one controller, send it to another controller, read it out of this other controller, and in this case, then they put it into ViewBag and then send it down to the model. And then here's an example of a Razor syntax using temp data. One last thing I didn't mention is temp data it's a dictionary. So very much like, remember we talked about ViewBag and we talked about ViewData, and ViewData was also a dictionary. Temp data is also a dictionary. So with that, dictionaries have keys and values, and they also have methods. Like here is a contains method. So you're seeing if your temp data object contains a message, then you display that message. And in this case, this is actually being used in the layout of this app. Okay, so we'll kind of code this up and see how it all works. But so there's a fair amount there about temp data. It's a dictionary. The data persists on the server until it's read. Turns out this dictionary class gives you some methods so that even if you read the data and you don't want the data to go away, you can mark the data as unread. So as soon as you write a line of code like this is reading temp data. This is pulling the data out. It would then be marked as read. Well, if you don't want to lose that property of your dictionary or whatever, that key, if you don't want to lose that, you can, with these methods, and these are all basically doing the same thing different ways, basically mark that as unread. So you can read it and then unread it, or this peek method actually allows you a way to access the data without marking it as read. So keep marks all temp data as unread. Keep with a key marks that single key as unread. And then peek will read the data without marking it as read. It's kind of cheating. It's like you're reading the data, but you're not marking it as read. So the idea there is that will actually keep the data around. It will persist the data so that you can use it again. Because again, if it is marked as read, then it's basically going to expire off of the server, and you can't use it anymore. Okay, so here is an example of using this PRG syntax where we're redirecting, we're loading some information up into temp data. So we're putting data into temp data, then we're redirecting to a different action. So then if you look at that action, this get request, we're using the peek method to read the data out of temp data, but not mark it as red, so that we can still access temp data active conference, and it wouldn't expire off of the server. So that's a little bit about this new property called temp data. That's, like I said, it's a dictionary. It's got some different ways of working with it. You're sending data from one controller to another controller, which is a big difference, right, between ViewBag. ViewBag says from a controller into a view, but this is from controller to controller. And we will continue to learn ways of persisting data, not just using temp data and things like that that's stored on the server. We'll learn some more things like cookies and session state and application state. All of that's coming around the corner in chapter 9, which is really good stuff. It's a really big business, right? Persisting data and storing people's data. So I think it'll be an interesting chapter 9 at least, when we start talking about cookies. All right. I know you guys take a break about this time, so I'm going to send you guys on break. When we come back, we're going to do this version 2. Okay, so version 2 of this makes our images clickable. So each image will be a link, as you can visually tell by our mouse pointer becoming a finger that probably looked that way since like the 1990s. That looks old, but that is what it is. When you click on it, then it takes you to a details. A different method. This is the home controller, just looking at the URL, details method with the ID of the team being SEA for Seattle Seahawks, also being in the URL. So we got the default route there. Then got a little button to add to favorites. And when you do that, it redirects you to the home page and tells you that you've added to your favorites. So nothing too crazy fancy, but definitely some new functionality. So let's jump in, take out this breakpoint, and start by turning our links into anchor tag links. And so we are going to start on the home index. So again, here, Solution Explorer, Views, Home Index. And we go down to the for each loop and loop each one of these LIs in an anchor tag. I really miss, as you said, VS Code and Emmet. I know there's anyways.
Yeah, wait, why doesn't it?
So this is going to send us to the details method of the home controller. The ID.
Mr. Chick,
Yeah.
we're having an issue. It's not letting us.
Yeah, so notice here if I type in A, it's not recognizing the anchor tag. So if you don't cancel IntelliSense with the escape key, that'll allow you to get in ASP action, details, route ID is the team ID. That's going to get the 3-letter abbreviation for the team, SEA for Seattle, into your URL. And then wrap your entire LI inside of that anchor tag. And obviously these links are not going to work, but now they're at least all links. And hovering, home details, our routes are working, just not displaying anything. So that's all good. Let's go ahead in our home controller, make that method. So here's our index method. I'll just minimize that. So let's examine our query here. Make this singular. There's only one team. Got a little link query, selecting all the teams with their conferences and their divisions. First, our default, where the team ID matches the ID that's passed in as a parameter. And if that fails and returns null, in other words, if this returns null, then instead it just creates a new team object for basically an empty display and returns that team to the view. You could return a view result here, as we talked about before.
Question.
Yes.
I'm getting a red squiggly under context, and it says that in context does not exist.
Okay, so do you have the context here? Do you initialize it here?
Yes.
And therefore it should be in scope. So let's look at it. Okay, now we got to wire up another view for this details method. So we're going to create a new view, Solution Explorer, views. This is inside of home, still the home controller. Let's add a view, razor view empty. This will be called details. Whoops, didn't mean to hotkey that. Okay, so just wire that up, the word team details and a title that says team details, so that when you click on one of this, you at least get team details and a title that says team details. So we are cooking with Crisco. Is that a thing that people say? Okay. Have you heard that before? Cooking with Crisco? Am I crazy?
I have not. Sorry.
Has anybody heard cooking with Crisco before?
Something like that.
Something like that.
Like cooking with gas or something like that.
Yeah.
Cooking with gas.
I like cooking with Crisco. When you just do a bootstrap call like this, it just kind of auto. You don't do the call -6. It's just gonna say, hey, I got 3 columns and divide it up in thirds. So we'll see how many columns we got. Doesn't even look like there's many columns, so we're just gonna have one big column inside of a row. List group. List group. So at model dot logo image. So the name is the team name. So when it comes to convention, going all the way back to our model, I kind of like the convention of team name over name, because here, this would say model team name over just model.name. I guess you could see, name belongs to a team, so it's the team name, but I think model.teamName would be a little more readable right there. Moving on to our next LI. I'm going to copy and paste this conference, because obviously the next one's coming as division, and change it from the conference name to the division name. Next thing we do is put in a little form. Wait a sec. This form belongs in a LI, so let's put in another LI. Close the LI. Format this how it should. And that's where we put the form. We do not have this controller yet, so that will be something that we create. A favorites controller with an add method. Good old primary buttons. And a submit button. This doesn't seem good. 2 primary buttons?
Do one like BT and dark
Yeah, we should change that.
or secondary.
I'm going to do this one primary, this one secondary, and put the primary one before the secondary one. let's see. Inside of the form, a couple of hidden fields. So what are these? These are pieces of data that you need to send across to your method, to your add method. Because presumably this add method is going to use those pieces of data. Yes.
Whenever I'm doing my ASP4s, it gives me IntelliSense that I don't need the app model. Is that fine, or is...
Let me take a quick look. Is it like a red or
No, it just...
how severe is the squiggly?
No, it's not squiggly. It gives me IntelliSense
Okay.
that I can use that without the app model.
Okay, clearly this is not finished, but let's just see what it does. And if I click on Arizona, now we got Arizona Cardinals, Conference NFC, Division West. It does take me to favorites add, which doesn't exist yet, which is cool. And return to homepage works. So, very nice. So, one, as was pointed out, these little dashes right here are not, they don't look too good, right? So, this is coming from a text decoration on your links. And so, my students told me how to fix it. And they said, go to your links, which are your index, bootstrap class. So, you do on your link, text decoration of none. Bootstrap class text decoration none. And that's prettier.
Gotta love Bootstrap.
Gotta love Bootstrap. All right, so we are nearing the end with, we just need to make our favorites controller. So bada bing, bada boom, into controllers, right click, add controller, capital F on favorites. Favo rights. Favorites inherits from controller. Let's make a post method.
The reason why you didn't do favorites controller, just do favorites.
Oh yeah, no. I should do favorites controller. So, out of an abundance of precaution, let's just delete and do that over. Good observation. Favorites controller. Now let's make our add method. we kind of come back to this a little bit in chapter 9, so we should be able to insert code here in the future. Chapter 9, but we don't really need it for now. And so what do we do here? We're going to load up some temp data called message. You might remember this syntax from C#. This is a fun little syntax. String interpolation. Team.name. Where you don't have to do concatenation. You do this shorterhand syntax. And then instead of returning iAction result, let's return a redirection. Redirect to action result. And return redirect to action. Index, comma, home controller. Now, again, it's not really doing anything fancy here, just adding a message to temp data. And then to display that, we're going to display that in a view, which we don't even read from it like the book goes through in the chapter and shows you how to read from temp data. We're putting data in, but we're not really reading data out in a controller like they show in the book, but that's okay. Let's just get this thing to work how they want it to work. Let's open up layout CSHTML, and underneath our H1 write a little if statement. If temp data keys contains the message key, then let's put in an H4. Yeah, but we are doing a redirect after a post, right? Post redirect get. Cool. Temp data sub message. Bada bing, bada bing, the end. We now have favorites.
Are the Cowboys really your favorite?
Man, you know, if I had to pick a favorite, I'm going to go right here.
Packers?
I'm going to go with the Packers.
There you
Okay,
go.
I respect
That's my
that.
team.
Yeah.
I respect that.
Well, and not that you guys care, but let me explain why. I was a St. Louis Rams fan. I went to every home game for years.
Wow, really?
Every home game the Rams had, I was there. And then they did what they did. The owner took the Rams back to LA. So I got burned by an owner. You can't get burned by Green Bay owners. The owners are the fans. And there's no way that a collective group of Green Bay fans, if you've ever been to a Green Bay game, they're not going anywhere. They like their football team in Green Bay.
There's like a 30-year waiting list for season tickets.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
Didn't know that. Yeah, because you pass them down to your kids.
Yeah, yeah.
That's right. So they never come up because
Very rarely do they come up. So
That's crazy.
Fan base actually
The fans are the owners,
Yeah.
so they're not moving. So after getting burned by the Rams, I would not be burned by the Green Bay Packers.
I like that.
Yep.
Thought on there.
Okay, that's version 2. That's the end of chapter 8. However, we got some more stuff to practice as we've been doing. There's some exercises at the end. So let's just roll into those. So there is with your student downloads, you've got starter files. So those starter files are on my computer in this directory. Student download starts chapter 8 guitar shop. There we go. One might be a little bit more in depth. So let's pin this up here. And just even before I launch it, I want to see if I've got any sort of data for a guitar shop in my databases. Okay, I do have a guitar shop database that I've used from past ones. And if I look under migrations, it looks like we've got a migration here and a context here. But presumably this is all the same data that's already in my database. So I'm not going to do anything with updating my database. I'm just going to launch it and see.
Which one did you launch?
So student download EX starts chapter 8 EX1 guitar shop. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Cool. I know that they've got an admin area, so notice there's a route for admins, manage categories. Looks like we've got 3 categories of products, and here are our products. We did this before with a different filter. So that was in admin. If I go back here, products and about, but only under admin can I manage products and add a new product, right? So just kind of looking at the difference here. Here, there's no add product, and there's also no add category, right? But if I go to admin, I can add categories. And if I go to manage products, I can add products. So you can do certain things here under admin. Okay. Run the app and test it. Make sure to test the product list page in the default area as well as product list in admin. So we definitely did that. Here's product list. And here's product list in admin. In the models folder, create a new C# class, products view model. So a products view model. So assumedly this is for our list routes. A list of products has a list of categories a list of products. Kind of the same little method that we wrote before that'll help us with our active links. Okay, reading step number 4. It's on page 327. In the controllers folder, open the product controller. And then go to the list method. Review the list method. So step 4 is just review the list. Notice it has an ID parameter right here that matches the ID segment of the default route. Because the view model doesn't have a property with the same name as the ID route, you can't use it as the parameter for the method. So our view model, back here, products view model, doesn't have an ID. And what it says there, therefore, like in a prior example, we put the data type here as a products view model. And it explains on step number 4, because of that missing ID, you can't do that. Because the view model doesn't have a property with the same name as the ID route segment, you can't use it as a parameter for this method. As a result, you need to manually create and populate the view model object. Step 5, in the list action method, delete the statements that use view bag. Where's our view bag? Go away, view bag. Okay, so there's view bag. Adios. So that's kind of at the bottom. Before the return statement, create and populate a view model object. Categories, products. Selected category is ID. Modify the return statement so it passes the view model to the view. So we talked about that model binding. Again, model binding, chapter 10. We're going to talk a little bit more about it. But basically what it's saying is that there's no ID on our model. So therefore, there's no model binding that can happen automatically to kind of get the ID. So we have to instantiate our model manually, which is what we're doing here. And then we're passing that model. So this, get a list of products. This is getting all the products here. Otherwise, if the ID is not all, our products has a where clause where we're filtering by the category. So getting all the products or filtering it by category. Manually creating a model with the categories that come back from this query. This is selecting all the categories. No, this is not order by, oh, it is ordering by category ID. So selecting all the category, some subset of products, and the ID that was passed in a selected category. If selected category is ID, you almost wonder why they wouldn't put because it's not, okay, because it's not a, this is a category. This ID represents a category. Not like an individual product. That represents a category. That's why. Okay. Okay, update, we're on step 8. Update the product list view in the default area. So, we close this stuff down, close. Views, product list. Change it from a list of products to a products view model. Okay, that's going to crash some things. Step 9. Before the first for each loop, modify the code that sets the active class for the all category so it uses the method of the view model. Okay, so right here, we refactor this and pass in at capital model, check active category, takes in a string, all. Now I want to look at my model real quick. And it's not doing a to lower, so the alls have to be, it's case sensitive, so capital A. Step 10, modify the first for loop so it gets the categories from the view model, not the view bag. So this is now at model dot categories. Within the loop, modify the code so that the active class is checked active category. So this piece right here at model check active category. C dot category ID. And since that's an ID, I'm sure it's dot name. Let me look at my categories real quick in the database. Category view data. Okay, yeah. You're passing the string guitars. So that should be right. modify the second loop so that it gets its products from the products property of the view model at model.products. Run the app, test the product list page in the default area. It should work the same as before. Products, okay, lists, guitars. There we go. So this filter by the name, essentially. Passing the name as the ID. Very cool. Okay, next up is step 14. Now we got to go into a different controller inside of the admin area. So we're going areas, admin, controllers, product controller. Kind of a repeat. We're going to go into the list method. So this is 15. In the list action method, delete the code that uses viewBag and add the code that creates and populates a product's view model. So delete the code that uses viewBag. And if I were to go back to what we did earlier inside of our controller product, we made a variable called model, new products model, setting those three properties. So we'll do the same thing here. Obviously no longer using viewBag. Var model equals new product view model. Products equals products. Categories equals categories. Selected category equals the ID. Semicolon right there. Modify the return statement to pass the model to the view. Pretty neat IntelliSense here. I noticed, if you notice the light blue products and the categories is white, it's because these variables have different scope. Products is a has local scope, so it's local here. However, categories, in the way it is written here, this is a class scope. So categories is initialized on the controller, on the constructor here. So they have just a different scope, and for that reason they have different colors in Visual Studio. Ryan, you had a question?
You kind of just answered it.
Okay. Yeah, that was interesting. Okay, that was 15, 16. Still in the admin area, open the product list view. So still in the admin area. I'm going to close this one. And I'm going to close this one. It's going to just build solution. Open the product list view. So, sorry, sidetrack. View, product list. Before the first loop, here's our first loop. Modify the code that sets the active class. Okay. So this little if statement right here. Oh, wait a tick. Don't we need to change this? Yeah, still in the admin area. Products view model. There we go. Products view model. Okay. And going to change this if statement. At model dot check active category all. So that was step 17. Modify the first loop so it gets the category from the view model, not the view bag. Model.categories. Line 13. Within the first loop, place that line right there. At model, check active category, c.name. So that was 19. It says within the first loop, use the check active category method of the view model to determine whether to set the active class for the category. Modify the second loop. So it gets the products from the products property of the view model. At model dot products. Run the app and test it. See what breaks. So we're going admin, products. Here we go. Links, active links, filtering. We are in the admin portion. Everything's working. Very nice. Okay, so let's finish this up. We're on 22 of 26, page 328. In the default area. In the default area, so I'm going to close this down, get out of areas, go back to the default area, open the layout under views, shared layout. Within the body element, before the call to render body, add a razor if statement that checks for temp data. Temp data keys contains message.
I think you got it right.
Oh, I got one extra missing curly. Use Bootstrap to style an H4 the way you want. H4 class. It is kind of nice to not have to type class name all the time.
Yeah.
Class of text center, text danger, BG, black, sure, at temp data sub. Is a capital M on message? No, we'll keep it lowercase. That was 22. 23, in the admin area, open up product and category controllers. So in the admin area, I'm going to close my layout. In the admin area, product controller, category controller. Modify the code to store an appropriate message in the temp data when a product or category is added, updated, or deleted. When you do that, use the key of message. Okay, so here's our add. This is on the get. We need to go to the post. So update here is when we're updating if category right here. So if category ID is here, we add the category. So let's do temp data sub message. Probably do this underneath. Oh, here's save changes. Here's what we'll do. We'll put that right there. Equals category dot name has been added. Let's go to the product controller, same, probably the update method. Update, post. Well, wait a minute, let me go back here. I want to put this in here. I want to put this temp data inside of the equals 0, because this is your add logic. This is your update logic. So we only want to do that if we're adding. Same thing on product controller. Let's go to update right here. Kind of paste this. And instead of category name, it'll be product name has been added. Run the app, test that it displays a message after you add, update, or delete. Oh, I didn't put it in all places. Okay, so that says added. This would be updated. Product name has been updated. Has been added. Go back to category here, and then this one will say has been updated. And then the last one is delete on the post. By the way, here we'll say has been deleted. and the post on the delete. Product name has been deleted. And we go to admin and we go to manage products. And I go to update Tama 5-piece drum set with cymbals. Let's add an S. Update with cymbals has been updated. Let's delete. Delete has been deleted. Add new product. Boy, I really don't know anything about guitars.
Oh, you could do. Oh, am I blanking? Fender, maybe?
Fender. And code FDR, I don't know. Fender Stratocaster. There we go.
Oh, there's already one up there.
So kind of testing those out. Those are working. Safe to assume the same is going to work on products or on categories. Guitars has been updated. Let's update it back. Okay, we are on step 25. Update the cart controller so it uses temp data. Cart controller. Let's find the cart controller. So it uses temp data item with a key of message to display a message in the product list rather than in the cart add. Cart controller should use temp data with a key of message to display a message in the product list rather than in the cart add view when a product is added to the cart. So we need to redirect. To do that, you need to delete the statement in the add that sets the product slug property of the view bag and then update the return statement to a redirect to the list of the product. Got it. You can delete the statement that sets the slug property of the view bag. And we need to set the message here. This is redirect to action result. So change that. This message needs to be changed. I'll just say something added to cart. I'm not cart controller. And now we need to redirect to action. And it's a different, it's the list action of the product. So when you go cart/add, but I don't remember seeing a cart add route. Run the app one more time. Be sure its message is displayed on the product list page when a product is added to the cart. You're talking about adding a product to the cart. I don't remember seeing an add a product to the cart. View our products. Must be under details. Let's go view. Oh, there it is. Okay. So now we've got cart add. And there it goes. Fender, there it is. Beautiful. It redirects. So view our products. Cart add. So it takes you right back to product list. Instead of what it was doing before was it was taking you to a different page. It was it's taking you to the cart. What would it take you to? The cart add. Where would that go? So cart controller. If I go under views, cart add, it was taking you here. You added a product to the cart. So it's taking you here before. We updated that so it didn't take you there. Instead it just pop that up. All right, well, that was some good practice. Let's stop the recording. That was a long one.